the reason that there is a housing crisis is that not enough houses have been built.
And that we have 25 million people who shouldn't be here.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I mean,
I think it's both.
I know you do. I don't think that many people who look into this agree with you, but about a third of the construction workforce in this country is Hispanic. Of those, a large proportion are undocumented. So how do you propose to build all the housing necessary that we need in this country by removing all the people who are working in construction?
Well, I think it's a fair question because we know that back in the 1960s, when we had very low levels of illegal immigration, Americans didn't buy houses, didn't build houses, but of course they did. And I'm being sarcastic, of course, in service of a point, Lulu. The assumption that because a large number of home builders now are using undocumented labor, that that's the only way to build homes, I think again
The country is
betrays
much
a
bigger. The
fundamental.
need is much bigger. I mean, I'm not arguing in favor of illegal immigration. I'm asking how you would deal with the knock-on effect of your proposal to remove millions of people who work in a critical part of the economy.
Well, I think that what you would do is you would take, let's say, for example, the 7 million prime age men who have dropped out of the labor force, and you have a smaller number of women, but still millions of women prime age who have dropped out of the labor force. You absolutely could re-engage folks into the American labor market. This is, I think,
To work in construction?
of course you could.
I
So long
mean,
as you
the unemployment rate is 4.1%.
but
Most
the
people who
unemployment rate, Lulu, this is important. The
But most people who
unemployment
don't work can't work in the regular economy. They're in the military, they're parents, they're sick, they're old. They might not want to work in
The
construction.
unemployment rate is does not count labor force participation dropouts. And again, this is one of the really deranged things that I think illegal immigration does to our society is it gets us in a mindset of saying we can only build houses with illegal immigrants when we have 7 million, just men, not even women, just men who have completely dropped out of the labor force. People say, well, Americans won't do those jobs. Americans won't do those jobs for below the table wages. They won't do those jobs for non-living wages, but people will do those jobs. They will just do those jobs at certain wages. And think about this from the
I,
perspective of an American company, okay? I want them to go searching in their own country for their own citizens. Sometimes people who may be struggling with addiction or trauma, get them re-engaged in American society. We cannot have an entire American business community that is giving up on American workers and then importing millions of illegal laborers. That is what we have thanks to Kamala Harris's border policies. I think it's one of the biggest drivers of inequality. It's one of the biggest reasons why we have millions of people who have dropped out of the labor force. Why try to re-engage an American citizen in a good job if you can just import somebody from Central America who's going to work under the table for poverty wages? It is a disgrace, and it has led to the evisceration of the American middle class.
Boom! Man, I didn't think J.D. Vance was a power hitter. I thought he only had gap power. But man, get out the measuring tape. Let's look at the launch angle and let's see the velocity of this home run. Okay, all right, so now that the excitement's worn down a little bit, this is a fantastic piece. This is how you deal with what is honestly a good faith argument. This lady, a reporter from the New York Times, is actually letting him speak. I am shocked that this is happening because in my young life, when I've been politically active and at least been able to watch and digest news and actually understand what's going on, I have not seen a political season like the one I'm seeing right now. For the first time, I think for the first time in my life, after the trauma of the Bush administration, and that's another historical topic for another day, because liberals got just absolutely triggered how they lost to George W. Bush. They didn't get over it. And so the media ever since then has just been openly hostile to Republicans. And now you have people having earnest conversations. Part of that is due to YouTube. It's due to all these other new organizations that are allowing these politicians new platforms, allowing them to speak. Then you've got people like Joe Rogan, these long-form content where you're talking for hours on end. And then you have guys like Tim Pool who have these sort of round tables for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And they talk about topics for longer lengths of time than they do on the cable news. So you have to get something different. So I think that's what's happening with the media. So that's a good thing. Then you have J.D. Vance doing a pretty decent job, but I have to put I have to tap the brakes slightly, not because he's not saying the right things. He is. talking about the people that have just left the workforce and said, nope, screw this. My family can take care of me. I can use my human capital instead of having to have another job. I'm just going to sort of nope out of society, or at least nope out of the workforce. That has been a huge problem ever since the Great Recession. And getting those people back into the workforce might not be the smartest thing. So instead, we need to be talking about how we open up the housing market. So I'm going to compare two cities. I would love to use some Texas examples, but I'm a Georgia boy from the Atlanta suburbs. All my roots are in North Georgia, East Tennessee. Family moved down to Marietta and to Kennesaw. And so I grew up and watched the street that I grew up on go from a two-way stop sign to a four-way stop sign, and then that quickly stopped to a traffic light, and then a four-lane road with multiple turning lanes. I have seen just this huge growth in my own young life, and that's because the zoning laws, which are local, by the way, allowed for the right amount of construction of homes. What we're now seeing in that area is more congestion than ever, because now they keep on pumping out all these apartment complexes because the growth and demand for jobs are still there, but the amount of land available has shrunk. And so you have to expand further and further out into the suburbs, which is making traffic in even counties that are 2, sometimes 3 counties away from the central hub of Atlanta and Fulton County, making those traffic areas an absolute nightmare. Compare that to San Francisco. So in Georgia, you at least still get affordable housing. You don't in San Francisco because there's no place to expand to. Since there's no ability to expand, the housing cost gets higher and higher and higher because there's more demand. In Georgia, in those suburbs, granted they expand outwards, but the price doesn't keep going upwards, although it has gotten higher recently in areas where I used to grow up. And that's because, well, there's no new housing, and if the demand's higher here, then it's going to be more expensive. It's simple supply and demand. And in liberal areas, that supply is low, so the demand is high. Thus, we need to look at this construction crisis from a completely different angle. And I think we need to look to guys like Elon Musk and, strangely enough, Walt Disney. Now, see, ignore the federal policies, because the federal policy on housing was probably going to lead to a disaster. It has to be localized and intentional. Now, you can encourage this from a federal level, which the Republican idea is always special tax cuts. That happened during the Trump administration. There was the Paul Ryan tax cuts, and then there was the equal opportunity zones. Both fantastic ideas that worked so well that Joe Biden kept them around. Funny how that works. So I think that the solution for the construction crisis isn't something that you talk about federally. Now, granted, J.D. Vance can't answer it like that, because if he does, he's going to sound weak. You can't sound weak on a presidential election. So that's why I'm lucky enough to have this platform. And I get to say that we need to look to expand into other areas. We need to look to redesign and reconfigure our cities into new towns, into new regions. Appalachia, Missouri, and the Ozarks, I think those areas are prime for a housing boom because they have a pretty decent climate, easy access to water, a burgeoning area that's just ready for an infrastructure push, and the housing is cheap. We can design new cities, help build a newer, more updated economy, but it has to come from minds like Elon Musk and, ironically, Walt Disney. And the reason I bring up Disney is because, you know the theme park Epcot? The original idea was the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. His original plans, when he was in his deathbed from lung cancer, he was looking up at the ceiling trying to plan what an ideal city would look like. And to this day, it still holds water. And so we need these forward-thinking ideas coming from entrepreneurs and people with vision. We don't need it from our politicians. We certainly don't need it from people like who are stuck in the past, like bureaucrats and people at the New York Times. So while J.D. Vance and Donald Trump shouldn't be quite literally leading the charge, they should be funding it and pushing into it. That's why Elon Musk has been such a fan. So I think the future is bright for construction in the United States because we can talk about the issues of illegal immigration, how that hurts the American workforce. But we need to start looking forward. It's no longer let's address the problems of today. I think we can move into a better vision for tomorrow by implementing new policies that will help us grow new cities and new regions around America. And you know what? The Trump administration has already floated this, not administration, you know what I mean. But Trump has floated this idea already. It's why I'm so on board with this. I think we can move America into a beautiful tomorrow and while keeping the very fundamental freedoms that has made us so successful and made us so unique on the world stage. That's what I think we need to be talking about in construction. So I know I usually just react to the videos, but I think that's a solution that's going to benefit everybody. And I will stand by these words.